Hi everybody, I hope you're all doing really well. Back today to do the book Postscript Tag, where I am looking back on my 2024 in reading, working through these various prompts to illuminate basically what I got up to in my reading life last year. One thing that this tag does not account for is how many books I actually read, and I'm very pleased to say that I was able to finish the year, finish December 31st, having read 101 books. Hilariously, I was there on December 31st thinking that I had 2 books to go to hit 100, and so I did a very quick reread of Mrs. Scrooge by Carol Ann Duffy, as well as a children's book that I had on my shelves that I hadn't read called Cities of the World. And I was like, you know what, it is a bit of a cheat, but never mind. Only to realise, having done all of that, that a book that I'd read earlier in the month, Wintering by Catherine May, I had forgotten to actually include in my Goodreads or my story graph. So actually I only needed to read 1 more book on December 31st instead of trying to cram in 2 children's books. So you know what, serves me right. But you know what, I got it in my mind towards the end of December that if I did manage to crack out a couple more books, then I would have been able to have read 100 books from every year since 2018. And I just didn't want to miss that opportunity, especially since I have officially set my Goodreads goal for 2025 for hitting 100 books this year. I know it's all arbitrary, I know that it doesn't actually matter. The quality of your reading is what should matter, but sometimes you just have to do it. But without much more further ado, let's get straight into these questions. Question number 1 is the longest book you read this year and the book that took you the longest to finish. Funnily enough, depending on what different app you go on or which website you look on, the answer could be one of 2 books for this. So I'm going to answer one for one prompt and one for the other, and say that the longest book that I finished in 2024 was Fane by Anne-Marie MacDonald, which came in at 736 pages. But the book that took me the longest to finish was actually The Iliad by Homer, but translated by Emily Wilson. This is one that I picked up back in 2023 when it first came out. It was one of my most anticipated reads of that year, but for some reason I got through a couple of chapters and then ended up putting it down and I didn't come back to it in 2023. And especially since the paperback was coming out in August 2024, I was like, okay, gotta crack on now, gotta read this book. This came in at around about 720 pages, though on Goodreads it comes up at over 800. So if you look on my Goodreads, it will tell you that this was the longest book that I read in 2024, but actually I do believe it was Fane by Anne-Marie MacDonald. But since it took me around about 9 months to actually get around to finishing The Iliad, we get to count both of them for this question. Question number 2 was a book you read in 2024 that was outside of your comfort zone. I'm not gonna lie to you, this year I have not been a very adventurous reader. I have very much been reading right inside my comfort zone. You can tell by the amount of romance books I've read this year that when I've been wanting to read, I've most likely been wanting to read for comfort. However, I did come across in my reading a book that isn't my typical genre at all, but that I dipped my toes into this year, and it was Strange Sally Diamond by Liz Nugent, which I suppose is more of a literary thriller, psychological thriller, definitely a bit of mystery thrown in there, which is a slightly darker book than I would typically go for, which was an interesting read for me, but probably mixed results in terms of my actual enjoyment. Question number 3 is how many books did you reread in 2024? And I will say my reread game was a lot stronger in the first half of the year than it was in the second. In 2024, I reread Romancing Mr. Bridgerton by Julia Quinn, Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell, A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting by Sophie Irwin, An Offer from a Gentleman by Julia Quinn, The Miniaturist by Jessie Burton, Unequal Affections by Laura S. Arminstern, Wicked by Gregory Maguire, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and Mrs. Scrooge by Carol Ann Duffy. So I believe that is 9 books that I reread in 2024. So just under 10% of my reading was rereads, which I would generally be quite happy about, aside from the fact that I was meant to be reading a lot more of my old favourite books in order to do a my favourite books of all time video. And unfortunately, the only one that I think would really count towards that, actually no, the only 2 that would count towards that were Hamnet and A Christmas Carol. But you know what, there's always next year to do that goal. Following on from that, question number 4 is your favourite reread of 2024. And I think that would have to go to Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. Every time that I read this, I end up liking it that bit more. And now this is the 3rd time that I've read it, it's actually become one of my favourite books of all time. I just think it's fantastic. Question number 5, a book you read for the first time in 2024 that you look forward to rereading in the future. For me, that is probably The Temple of Fortuna by Elodie Harper. In general, I look forward to reading the entire Wolf Den from beginning to end, as well as A Lady's Guide to Scandal. You will have seen that as soon as I'd read this book, this new book from her, I immediately went back to her previous book, which was A Lady's Guide to Fortune Hunting, and reread that one, absolutely devoured it. So I definitely think I'm on a bit of a romance kick and definitely a bit of a Sophie Irwin kick. I'm very much looking forward to her next book, which is hopefully coming out this year. Question number 6 is favourite single short story or novella that you read in 2024. That would have to be Foster by Claire Keegan. I read that right at the beginning of the year. It was one of the first books that I read and it was brilliant. Really definitely set a high bar for novellas going forward. I would generally say that Claire Keegan was a bit of a short story novella favourite for this year. She just knows how to write in such a clean, crisp way where there isn't a word out of place. And I think if you are into your short stories and novellas, she is definitely the author to check out. Question number 7 is Mass Appeal, a book you liked and would recommend to a wide variety of readers. For me, I think I'm going to go with 18 by Alice Loxton. And definitely the literary world seems to agree with me because this was actually the Blackwell's book of the year. This is Alice Loxton looking at various famous and under the radar historical figures, looking at their childhoods and particularly looking at what their life would have been like by the time they turned 18, what their early life had to say about what would come after, but also to kind of give you this sense of there are infinite possibilities when you are 18 years old and you just never know what turn your life might go down. I think this is especially a great book to give to any young people in your lives who are starting university, but I think can be enjoyed at any age, not just 18. Question number 8 is Specialised Appeal, a book you liked but would be hesitant to recommend to just anyone. And I'm not gonna lie, I don't really feel like I have a lot of recommendations that are just so niche. Potentially The Notebook, which is A History of Thinking on Paper by Roland Allen. Some people might look at that book and think, oh, that's a little bit odd. Why would you want to read an entire book about The Notebook? But I thought it was pretty fascinating. Question number 9 is Reflect on your year as a bookish content creator, goals met, good bad memories, favourite videos you made, etc. I would say I think I've had a pretty good year. I'm pretty happy with the videos that I've made. You'll see from my goals video that not every video that I had planned to make did I end up actually doing, but I'm not really kicking myself too much about that. I was really delighted to get to go on 2 different booktuber meetups, one that was in East London at the beginning of the year and one back in October in York, as well as being invited to attend Katie over at Books and Things, her book launch for The Trouble with Mrs. Montgomery Hurst. It was really lovely to get to attend that. But obviously 2024 on BookTube has been a pretty sad year. There has been a lot of loss in this community. I'm thinking particularly of Jennifer over at Jennifer Brooks, who we lost right at the beginning of the year, as well as Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf, who I got to meet actually in person a couple of times and was so lovely, and she is so very missed. The downside of making such great friends on BookTube is that when something like this happens, it's unexpected and it hits you hard. And even if you just know somebody online and you've never actually met them in person, it doesn't mean that you are odd for mourning them and for being sad and missing them months later. I think that is completely normal and justified, and I think, you know, take your time. But I have been really heartened to see how many tributes there have been for the various creators that we've lost this year. There are still read-alongs celebrating their taste in books and just making sure that we always remember them, and I just think it's so lovely and touching and just shows what a fantastic community BookTube really is. Question number 10 is to tag some fellow bookish content creators. I will link down below a few people who have been really cheering me up this year in the hopes that they might want to do this tag. And there we go, those are all of the questions to the book Postscript tag for 2024. Do let me know if you've read any of the books that I've spoken about today, or let me know any of your answers to the questions that were put to me in this tag. I would love to hear your answers. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Thanks. Bye.